Hey everybody, Pastor Dean here. Happy New Year. It is time for us to take a look at our text for this coming Sunday, January 8th, but also some plans for the coming months leading up to Easter. So hang on to the end of the video and I'll talk about those. So this weekend is going to be a combination Sunday. It's the way that the calendar falls. Often we either have to celebrate Epiphany before it happens, or we have to celebrate both Epiphany and Baptism of the Lord on the same Sunday. So the way the calendar falls, with Christmas Day being a Sunday, January 1st being a Sunday, and then January 6th falling in the middle of the week, being on a Friday this year. That means that on the 8th, we will celebrate not only Epiphany on the Sunday closest to Epiphany, but also we will remember the Baptism of the Lord, which is typically the Sunday following Epiphany. So the 8th fits both of those descriptions as the closest to Epiphany, as well as the Sunday that follows Epiphany. That's how it is this year, and that's how it is most years anyway. So I'm going to preach from Matthew 2, 1-12, which is the visit of the Magi to Jesus. But then after my sermon, I'm going to shift to Matthew chapter 3, there towards the end, where John baptizes Jesus and the heavens open up as Jesus is coming out of the water, and we will remember our baptisms as congregation. So this video will talk about Matthew chapter 2, and then after I finish that, then I'll chat a little bit about what's coming up from now until the middle of April. So anyway, so let me read the text for this coming Sunday, Matthew 2, 1-12, and then we'll go from there. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it had been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out. And there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. All right. So this is a familiar text for many of us, for most folks. It is connected to the Christmas story and the birth of Jesus, and yet Epiphany is its own celebration. So Advent leads up to Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, when we celebrate the arrival of the Christ child. And then there are 12 days of Christmas between the 25th of December and the 6th of January. And on the 6th of January, the 12th day of Christmas, we remember and we memorialize the arrival of the Magi. Now, history is divided a little bit on when exactly the Magi showed up into the story. So, because the narrative details, as far as the wise men are concerned, are fairly sketchy, they're fairly thin here in Matthew, and they only appear in Matthew. Then we don't really know exactly where they came from. All we get is from the east, and we don't really know how long it took them to get from where they were to Bethlehem, where Jesus was. So there's different schools of thought. And because oftentimes we combine the birth narratives and this narrative together, there's this combination that happens where we see the Holy Family in the Kataluma, as Luke calls it, where there was no place for them in the inn, so they're underneath the guest house. And Jesus is in the manger, and the shepherds who are immediately told of Jesus's birth go and see them. And then in our nativity scenes, in our creches, we put shepherds on one side and wise men on the other side. And because we've combined these stories together, then then many times we see that popular ways of thinking about the Christmas story is that Mary and Joseph go to Bethlehem. Jesus is born. The shepherds come, and then the wise men come, and they're all together there at the worshiping at the manger. And there's some problems with that, and it's not worth blowing anybody's Christmas story up to dig into that. But I just want you to know that, first of all, there's no shepherds in Matthew's gospel, and there's no wise men in Luke's gospel. There is the birth of Christ, but I want you to notice a couple of things. So in Luke's gospel, Mary and Joseph have gone to Bethlehem to be registered for the census. And the time comes while they are there for Jesus to be born, and there's no room for them in the inn, in the Kataluma, the guest house. So they're underneath the house where the animals are, and Jesus is born and placed into a manger. When the wise men arrive, they don't go to the Kataluma. They don't go to a guest house. They go to just a house. It's a completely different word. It's oikos. And that means a home, a household, and so that's where they go, and they find the child with his mother, and they bow down and worship him. So depending on how far away these magi were from Bethlehem, it may have taken up to 2 years for them to get to Bethlehem. Most scholars believe that that the Magi, which is the word there, and we translate it wise men. Different translations have, sometimes they call them Magi, sometimes most of the time it's wise men. And but the Magi is a direct transliteration from the Greek, but it's a borrowed Persian word. And so oftentimes these Magi are Persian, most likely in origin, and it's understood that they are some kind of astrologers or magicians or sorcerers or even wizards. And for some folks, especially in the 21st century, for there to be wizards in Scripture is a little difficult. But there's a sense that they were learned men, hence the wise men, and they were watching the skies for special signs in the heavens of something significant happening. And that's what takes place, is that they are the wise men. They came to Jerusalem because we observed his star at its rising. The word there is Anatole, Antole in Greek, and it means it means a rising, or it means in the east. And so they saw the star, and it was significant enough that they noticed it differently than other stars that they'd seen before. And so they followed it. They noticed that it was moving. And so they followed that star, and they realized that something significant is happening here. And so they follow the star, and they follow it all the way to Jerusalem. And so they speak with King Herod, who is the current king of the Jews, about the child who has been born king of the Jews. And that's the distinction between Jesus and Herod. Herod was not born the king of the Jews. He's not even Jewish. He was put in charge of the Jews, and he's called the king of the Jews. But Jesus is born king of the Jews because he is Jewish, and he is the Lord. So they've come and they're speaking to the current king of the Jews about this newborn child who will be the king of the Jews. And so, yes, Herod responds with being frightened. He was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. And he calls together the chief priests. He calls the highest ranking priests, and then he calls together the scribes, the men who knew the law, who taught the law, who were willing and able to read and write the law. And they come, and they search the scriptures, and they find Micah chapter 5. And Micah chapter 5 says that in you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. And shepherd there is a verb. It means to lead. It means to tend to and to guard the flock that is Israel. So the king is going to be born in Bethlehem. So Herod sends the Magi to Bethlehem, and he tells them to come back and tell me where he is so that I can go and worship him too, or pay him homage, is the way the NRSV translates it. It's this idea of bowing the knee towards a superior. Now, for Herod to bow the knee to a superior is almost an ironic statement, because Herod didn't fear anyone other than Caesar. Anybody in his rule and reign who even attempted to step in front of him was squashed, to the point that he killed members of his own family in order to maintain his line of power in this region, in the Judean region. So for Herod to say that he's going to go and worship this newborn king of the Jews is ironic, number one, but it's false in the best sense of the word. He's going to, as we'll find out after the scope of this particular passage, that he's going to eliminate every male that was 2 years and younger, in order to get rid of this child that is going to be the king of the Jews. So the Magi, the wise men, leave Jerusalem and go to Bethlehem, which isn't a far stretch. It's not far away. And they follow the star again. So they heard the king, they set out ahead, and ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising. Again, same word, in the east, as it's arising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. And so this star is vastly unusual. Stars don't normally move and stop, and then move and stop. Stars just move. or as we as we see as our Earth spins, we see it in particular places, and then as the Earth rotates on its axis, we see that as we move around the sun, we see stars in different places in the heavens. But this star is different. It moves and it stops over the place where Jesus was, and over the house where he was. And the wise men go in and they find the child and they find his mother and they kneel down and worship him. And there's the sense that these wise men who've been on this journey from the east bow their faces to the ground and almost literally kiss the ground where the child is. So this star silently leads these men from the east to Bethlehem, testifying to there is something brand new going on, and they need to pay attention to it. So then the wise men, are warned in a dream not to return to Herod, but to go, and so they don't, and so they go by a different route back to their home. They were not told who gives them this dream. We're not told exactly what it is in their dream that they're warned about, but it tells them enough. Matthew tells us enough that the warning in the dream is don't go back to Herod, and they decide, okay, we'll go a different route back to our home in the east. And so so these men from outside of Judea, these are Gentiles, come and find the newborn king of the Jews. And they are traveling, following this star to discover its meaning and its origin and what it is it's trying to tell them. So they go to the current king of the Jews to learn about the new king of the Jews. And it seems from our text that the current king of the Jews and his religious leaders and scribes are ignorant of the fact that there's been a new king that has been born. And so fear takes over. Fear takes over Herod, takes over Jerusalem, takes over the chief priests and the scribes, and they respond with, well, the king is supposed to be born in Bethlehem, so we better go find out. But they don't go. Herod sends the wise men with a task to come back and report back what they have found. So the Magi find Jesus, Mary, they worship him, they offer him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh, which portray and portend the future roles that Jesus will have. Gold is for his royalty, frankincense for his priestly duties, and myrrh for his death and the sacrifice that he will make. And then they go home by a different route. They don't go and tell Herod where they found the king of the Jews. They go a different way. And they go after having this encounter with Christ, with Jesus, and they go differently. They don't go back the same way. They've been transformed by their worship of Jesus and their encounter with Jesus. And now they go by a different route to their home. So the Epiphany, which is the way that we talk about the appearance of Jesus, there is a sense that we encounter Jesus, and when we leave that encounter, we leave different. We don't return to our old ways. we go in a new way. We go to be new people because we've encountered Christ, and we go to help others have that experience as well. Who knows how many people the wise men and the Magi told along the way? Let's just think, if they took 2 years to come from the east to Bethlehem, and they take 2 years to get back to their home, how many people do they talk to along the way? Thousands, maybe, about who they have seen, what they have experienced, and what that meant to them. And how many more of those people might have flocked to Bethlehem, to Israel, to find Jesus? Maybe over the coming years, over the coming decades, as Jesus is growing, and as Jesus is beginning his ministry, some of those people on the outskirts of Judea, the Decapolis and the places that are described on the edges of Jesus's community, may have come from places that the Magi had visited on their way back home. Now, that's purely speculation. I'm just throwing something out there for you to think about. But notice that the Magi are outside the Jewish faith. They're Persian. They probably have some kind of Persian religious upbringing and faith, and practice. They're not Jewish, and yet they've encountered the King of the Jews, and they've been transformed, and perhaps they've begun to share the news of his birth, his arrival, and how he is vastly different. So who knows how many people they told, and how many people were drawn to Jesus because of that. Again, I'm just thinking about that amount of time, and how people might have shifted their own focus towards Jesus as he grew, and as they begin to experience him as he begins to teach 3 decades later. So a couple of questions that I'm thinking about right now as the sermon is taking shape is, what compelled the Magi to follow the star? What was it about this particular star that compelled them to follow? And then another question is, how is God using outsiders to warn insiders, aka Herod, of a new regime or of a regime change in his area of leadership? But then also the next question, I think, is what's the significance of the Magi being warned in a dream not to return to Herod? And was it God? Was it the Lord, Yahweh, who warned them? Because that verb there, to be warned in a dream, it's this really long verb in Greek, but it translates to, or it's defined as having been divinely warned in a dream. That's literally what it is. So it's from a root word that means to transact business, or to make an answer. So there's this idea that God is acting on the Magi to warn them in response to something that they've asked. So when you ask a question, then God responds, and that response, in this particular case, is a warning, and it's in the form of a dream. So it also has this understanding of being divinely commanded, admonished, or instructed. So when the Magi are warned in a dream, most likely they are warned by our God, the one true God, to leave in a different direction, to go a different route, and not to go back to Herod. And they respond faithfully. So these are just a few questions that I'm thinking about as this message takes some shape. Anyway, so after my message, I'm going to pivot to the baptism of the Lord, which is um, in Matthew 3, beginning in verse 13, and we will remember our baptism as we look at how Jesus, as he comes up out of the water, he suddenly the heavens were open, and he saw the Spirit of God descending on him like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven says, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." And so we come to the waters of baptism, knowing that Jesus was called the beloved, and God is pleased with him, and that we, as we consent to baptism, whether we were baptized as an infant or as an adult or as a youth, that God has named us and claimed us as his beloved, and he is well pleased with us as we come to those waters. And so we will remember our baptism at the end of worship on Sunday, and go forth out into the world to be the people of God from that place. Okay, so that wraps up this coming Sunday, and then I want to tell you a little bit more about the calendar moving farther out. So I'll be off on vacation on the 15th, and so my friend, the Reverend Fred Durham, will be preaching for me on January 15th. And then I'll be back on the 22nd to start a 3-week series on giving and generosity, looking in Matthew chapter 6 and Jesus's words there about giving and worry and contentment. And so we'll be looking at the latter half of Matthew chapter 6. And that'll last us to the first Sunday in February. So it'll be January 22nd, 29th, and February 5th. And then for the rest of the time, so for beginning on the 12th of February and going through Easter, we'll be looking into the Gospel of John. And specifically for the 7 weeks leading up to Palm Sunday, we will be looking at the 7 signs, the 7 miracles that Jesus does in the Gospel of John. So things like turning water into wine, healing the man who was lame for 38 years, the feeding of the 5,000, raising Lazarus. There are 7 of them in the Gospel of John. And so we'll cover those over the course of that time. Palm Sunday, we'll look specifically at John's version of the triumphal entry into Jerusalem from John 12. And then we'll utilize on Maundy, Thursday, we'll do prayer stations again, the Stations of the Cross. Good Friday will be the Passion narrative from John 18:1 through 19:36, I think 35. And then Easter Sunday will be John's resurrection story from John 20, verses 1 to 18, all the way through his conversation with Mary Magdalene. So that takes us all the way to April 9th. So that's February 12th through April 9th. The Sunday after Easter will be our Rise Against Hunger meal packaging event. So we won't have official worship that morning, but we will be worshiping our God by being in service and mission to our world and to our community. And we will package 25,000 meals a day. You'll hear more about that as it gets closer. And then following that event, so that'll be the 23rd. The meal packaging event will be on the 16th. On the 23rd of April, then we will begin something new, and I don't quite know what that'll be yet. So we got some time to get there. So that takes us all the way through April 16th, and we'll be through Lent at that point. I am trying to put a all-church Bible study on an evening during Lent for us to take a look at either one of the longer passages from one of the longer signs that Jesus does in John, or at the chapters that we're going to kind of that last sort of that 13 to 17 section of the Gospel of John that we won't formally address on Sunday mornings during that series. So still thinking about that, trying to look at the calendar and see where that will fall best and fit the best. Anyway, I hope that comments about Matthew 2 are helpful. I hope that you are doing well in this new year. And I pray that if there are questions that you have, resources that you need, that you'll reach out and let me know how I can be of service to you. I appreciate what you do as Sunday school and small group leaders. I pray God's blessings upon your work, upon your calling, and upon your groups. And I pray that you continue to seek God in this new year. It's not too late to start one of the reading plans or a new habit for this new year if you haven't already. I know that we're, as the time I'm recording this, we're only 4 days into the new year, and my time each morning has been an incredible blessing to me. So and I've hit all 4, so it's been wonderful. We'll see how things transpire over the course of the year, and I pray that if you have questions, if you have if you need recommendations, that kind of stuff, shoot me an email, send me a text, give me a call, whatever you need. Stop by on Sunday or during the week. Happy to resource you however I can. All right. Blessings to you. God bless.